Hello friends, as you know, we've been doing this series on modern drama, and we have gone ahead with a number of lectures, and we are now at the threshold of the 20th century, and one of the earliest 20th century dramatists is George Bernard Shaw. You must have heard of him. This person is fondly called GBS. The man was born in 1856 in the middle of the 19th century, and he lived quite long. He died in the middle of the 20th century, and half of his life being in the 19th century and the other half being in the 20th century, he was aware of the complexities where they started happening and where they finally led to. And because the two things, the transition from the 19th century to the 20th century, and that transition is not just at the level of years that are there in the century, but in social life, in the changes that take place in how people live and how they face the questions of living, the question of earning, the question of communicating, the question of making rules and regulations, relationships. All that is all the time changing, and Bernard Shaw was witness to this process at a quite deep level. He was born in Dublin, Ireland. That is important because Dublin is a city and Ireland is the country, but this country is not exactly independent the way a country should be. It's a part of what is called United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom means that the power center is somewhere else. The power center would be in London, not in Dublin. And George Bernard Shaw would look at the English reality, the British reality, the Irish reality in a different way than people born in England would. So that would make him a very conscious, a very self-conscious, a very angry, a very dissatisfied person. And naturally, if you are dissatisfied and angry, and you want to change things from the bottom, from the grassroots, then you have to be a thinker. And Bernard Shaw was basically a thinker. In his plays also, he made people talk, made people discuss. And his plays are known for their discussions, not for the action. Bernard Shaw would not visualize, very great action on the stage. He would just take people forward in terms of human figures, communicating, disagreeing with one another, and then finally creating a sense of wonder, a sense of thought, a sense of comedy, a sense of tragedy, whatever he felt like doing. So this general introduction is important because Bernard Shaw was at the root of his understanding a dramatist. He was born in complexities, he was born in contradictions, he was born in differences, and he expressed those differences in his works. So I say this, and then I go to the next point, which is that he carried the influence from the family that came to him, and he extended it further. He extended its scope and its depth. His mother was a symbol of new woman. Imagine, in the 19th century, the woman would be born in the early 19th century, and that was the time when women started asserting themselves. But assertion was not easy, as you have known from the discussions that we had previously under different lecture series. The new woman being called in the 19th century was definitely a kind of achievement. So she went to London early in life to make her way as a singer and voice teacher. So she was that way given to the art of music, and she sang herself, and she also trained people to sing. That kind of a professional person in the 19th century was rare to get, was rare to meet. And Bernard Shaw was lucky enough, to have such a mother who will tell him about the softness, the sweetness, as well as the effectiveness of music at a very early stage. In fact, because of this, Bernard Shaw started writing reviews of musical concerts himself quite early in life. And what about the father then? I'm not mentioning Bernard Shaw's father. Bernard Shaw's father was not a gentleman in the usual sense of the word. He was taken to drinking, and he was a heavy drinker, and perhaps he would create nuisance also at home. And who knows, because the woman, his wife, would be not happy with him. Therefore, he found a way out to live her imaginative, her artistic life away from the influence of her husband. So that kind of tension is there. But it had a positive effect on Bernard Shaw as a dramatist, and you will find that his women characters are particularly influential in the course of life that they lead. And in fact, the play that I am going to begin discussing after giving you a general view of the dramatist in the first part of the lecture, you will see that the play is called Major Barbara. So Barbara is a woman, and Barbara is a young woman. She would be in her early 20s, and Bernard Shaw has picked up this character in order to tell you about the strength that a woman has potentially and really. Now, potentially in the sense that the woman may not be exposed to the understandings that are there around her, and she may be carrying somebody else's influence all the time, but then gradually she would make mistakes, and maybe Major Barbara in the beginning has made certain mistakes, and then she learned from them. So that is the kind of narrative that can be built from this play, which is called Major Barbara, and I'll take it up in some detail later on. Shaw remained active as a playwright, critic, polemicist, and a political activist all his life. So that you have to keep in mind. He would never rest, in peace at home and create a sense of harmony, among people and all that. Being a playwright, he would be all the time promoting, exchange of ideas. So he is a playwright essentially. When I say that he is a playwright essentially, what I mean is that he didn't know it himself, that he had the playwriting in him. He had the seeds of playwriting in him. He didn't know it, so he started writing prose things. He wrote, a large number of novels in his early life, and he took those novels, in the manuscript form to the publishers, and publishers would not, in a manner of saying, touch his prose writing with a pair of tongs, because he didn't have much to say. He was too, non-serious in his utterings, in his sentences, and in his statements. And the 19th century, being a century of novel writing, was not impressed. The publishers would straight away refuse to publish his novels, and finally he knew that he had to think of another way of expressing himself, and then he took to plays. In his 20s, he took to plays. Before that, in the early 20s, he would be writing novels. So, in fact, there are 5 unpublished novels by Bernard Shaw. They are available somewhere, I believe. I have not tried to search. There is no urge in me to read him as a novelist, and I have not seen much of criticism, critical discussion on his novels, because that was just the beginning of his career, and he was a writer in the making. And the first attempt at writing in that sense failed. He was a critic, as I said earlier, critic not in the literary sense, not that he would write essays and articles on literary works, on Shakespeare, on romantic poets, on 18th century novelists, on 19th century novelists. He would of course review, but in a very general sense. But he is a critic of society. That is important. A writer is supposed to be a critic of society, and a critic of society doesn't mean that one has to condemn all the traits all the time. A critic is one who is critically aware, who knows that something good also has some flaws in it, and in things that have flaws, there is something good there. So that way, a critic is a alert mind to appreciate than merely propagate. He would not propagate, he would appreciate, and that made him a fine critic of society in his plays. The other word that I used was polemicist. Polemicist is one who discusses very sharply. You have one view, your friend has another view, and then you express your view, the other person disagrees with you, He gives arguments, then you think of his arguments and you produce counter arguments, and the discussion goes on. That is called polemicism. So he was a polemicist. He would take his own view quite seriously. At the same time, he would also take the other person's point of view quite seriously. So there are different points that you make, and there is a different point that your friend is making, and instead of straight away saying I disagree with you, you say, okay, no, let me see what points you make. So you say to your friend, well, the first point you have said this, the second you have said this. Then you explain those points to the people with whom you are talking, and then you bring your counter arguments. That is called being a polemicist. And last but not least, he was a political activist all his life. And politics, in the 19th century particularly, was socialist politics. So he is a socialist writer. He is a writer of equality. He is a writer of fighting against injustice. He is a writer of creating a scene, which is a happy scene, and that happiness is constantly threatened by certain forces in society, and unless the forces in society are leveled and everybody is more or less equal with others, so that there is no pressure on anyone, and there is no urge in somebody to influence another person, unnecessarily. So that means socialism. So socialism means that there is no powerful section and there is no weaker section. All sections are equal. They live. They are supposed to live, democratically, and through discussion, debate, through harmony, through consensus. That is called socialism in the best sense of the word. And he was a socialist in the best sense of the word, and that's why he was known all over the world. He must have inspired a large number of generations, not merely in England, not merely in Ireland, but also in the entire world. He was quite popular in the early part in America and in most of Europe, and his plays would be translated into different languages. And then he would also campaign. Now, by way of just telling you something general about him, he would regularly go in London to Hyde Park. That's a big park somewhere near the Parliament House, and there is a river Thames that flows there. And in that park, people would assemble in the morning, and Bernard Shaw would carry his stool with him, his large table with him. He'll put there at the center of some corner, and he would stand on it, and he would give lectures to the people who came for a walk there. So, and he would tell them the fine points of socialism. So he was that kind of a political activist. So he would criticize the government policies, he would criticize political leaders, he would criticize the social tendencies, he would criticize those who were unnecessarily cruel to women, to the poor people. He would say all that, being a socialist, and that way he became a household name, not merely in the literary circles, but also in the social circles. Once again, I say that I've seen his photographs sitting, with Einstein, and he's cracking jokes. So Einstein is there, then there is Charlie Chaplin and Bernard Shaw, and in that company, he's able to create a great sense of wit and humor. So and all these people, Charlie Chaplin, Einstein, and Bernard Shaw, all of them had one point common, that was socialism. So I call it political activism. Then he's a legend in his own life, naturally. People can't tend to ignore him. He got Nobel Prize, and he refused to accept it because he said that when he needed money, nobody gave him, and when he doesn't need money, then he is given the Nobel Prize. But anyway, he was awarded the Nobel Prize. He wrote his 5 novels, as I said, and I tell you now the years when he wrote. He was born in 1850, so when he was 29, he started writing novels, and he wrote till 83, and they were rejected by publishers. Finally, Shaw began his career as a playwright. Major Barbara was his comic masterpiece. It was written and staged in 1905. That is when he was 55 years old. So you can see that it's a mature play written by a mature writer, a person who has to say something very sharp and very palatable at the same time. So that's a difficult combination to make. But then he wrote this play, which is the center of our discussion today, and this play was staged, I say, in 1905, and then it was published soon after, maybe in 1906 or 1907. But because it was written and staged there, so I have kept this date as 1905. And as I suggested, and as I told you, Major Barbara actually is a woman and a young woman, and he has picked up this young woman to present her on the stage as the voice of justice, as the voice of goodness, as the voice of challenging the old modes of thought. Initially, Shaw was inspired by Norwegian playwright Ibsen. Shaw's study of Henrik Ibsen was published in 1891 under the title The Quintessence of Ibsenism. It's a book, it's a appreciative, critical, propaganda sort of a book. He's telling people what is the essence of being Ibsen. Ibsen is a great playwright of Norway, and Bernard Shaw would have read Ibsen in the original, and he would have been inspired by him. Ibsen himself was a socialist, and Ibsen had a great reputation as a playwright in the 19th century. We've had a discussion on Ibsen last week, and Bernard Shaw was, as I say here, inspired by Ibsen to write plays, and he was so happy with reading Ibsen that he decided finally to write a book on him in order to share his thoughts about his favorite writer Ibsen, and he called it the quintessence. Quintessence is the basic principles, the essence of Ibsenism. So you have to be an Ibsenist or Ibsenite, and then only you can do justice to the social problems that you take up for presentation. So you see that when he is not writing plays, he is writing books of thought, and then also he is propagating in not in the sense that he would not understand the difficulties faced by the listeners, but then he has counter arguments to give, and Ibsen also did the same. So Bernard Shaw's role directly as well as through Ibsen would be the role of provoking people to think. You alert them, you give them nudges, you tell them they are wrong, you tell them that they have to change their opinion, and you have to tell reasons why they should change their opinion. And if they don't change their opinion, then that is their problem. The only thing, the weapon that Bernard Shaw is going to use in his writing of plays would be the weapon of wit. He knows how to create a witty situation and a funny situation, and a situation that disturbs others. And you know that if somebody is laughing with you, if somebody is laughing with me, then I enjoy. And if somebody is attacking, laughing at somebody else, then also I enjoy. But if I'm laughing at the person sitting in front of me, or if the other person laughs at me sitting in front of me, then it bites, it hurts. So Bernard Shaw definitely would be enjoyable to people among the audience. But then when the audience is ridiculed for their wrong views, then they would be compelled to think. So that is called provocation. That you provoke people to counter, you provoke people to be angry, you provoke people to think. And Bernard Shaw is not Bernard Shaw if he does not provoke. Then a few plays by him. Arms and the Man is one play. He writes in the last decade of the 19th century. Candida is another, the same year. So you see his output and his stamina of writing, two plays in the same year. Mrs. Warren's Profession, 1902. Man and Superman, 1903. Pygmalion, 1912. St. John, 1923, among a whole lot of others. And then I say finally that St. John was a tragedy. So he is a comic genius. He makes people laugh, but he became very serious when it came to the writing of a play on the life of St. John, who was a French woman, and once again a young woman, and a rebel, and a person who would be needed by France to fight an enemy, and therefore she joins the army, and Saint John, leads that army. She is able to defeat the enemy of France at that time, and people are very happy that she is getting, the country the freedom. But the moment the people become free, then they feel threatened by Saint John's ideas, and therefore finally they are so angry with her that they burn her on the stake. They collect sticks. On them they put the body of the living woman, Saint John, on it, and they burn it from below, and she is burned in full public view. And why should this happen? That a woman who served the cause of the country was finally put on the stake and burnt. And she remained a kind of a villain for a long number of years, I think 400 years or so. And only sometime in the 20th century was she retrieved from that kind of bad name that was given to her in history in France so early in life, because she was in the medieval times. And then, she was called a saint. So sainthood was bestowed on her very late in life. And Bernard Shaw found it very tragic that a great woman, a courageous woman, a woman who lived by her principles, by her life, and who served the cause of the country, she was burned by the same people who were initially her admirers. But that's how humanity is. There are certain classes in society which use great people to their advantage, and when when the purpose is served, then they don't bother. They throw that person into the dustbin. So Bernard Shaw would be very angry. So this is the only play, one of the very few plays in which Bernard Shaw shows his anger, and Saint John is that play. Shaw wrote the books An Unsocial Socialist and The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism. These are the books, where he stated his views directly, for the benefit of the audience. See the wit in the title of the first book. It is called Unsocial Socialist. He is not social in that sense that he doesn't please people. So in fact, in some cases, he is criticizing them very sharply. But then, at the root of himself, he is a socialist. So a socialist whom the society needs, but who is not popular with the ruling classes, for instance, the people with money, they would not like socialism ever to come to the scene, because then their superiority and then their economic and social status would be threatened. Therefore, for them, such a person who is a socialist will be their enemy. So he admits that he is unsocial in that sense, but then in his heart he is a socialist. His argument is socialist, his writing is socialist, his themes are socialist, and therefore he has to directly tell them. Now that also reminds me of another thing of his character. Most of his plays, if you buy a play by him these days, it will be preceded by a preface. And sometimes I would suggest that you should count the number of pages that Bernard Shaw would give to the preface. Sometimes the number of pages is larger of the preface than of the actual text. But even if it's not larger, it's almost as long. Sometimes it is short, but short doesn't mean 5 or 10 pages. Even the short preface would be easily 30-40 pages. And that I say that Bernard Shaw has lot of things to say, lot of things to share with us, and he is not stingy with words. He would use words to good effect, and he will definitely propagate ideas. But his ideas are not actually dry as dust. His ideas are not boring. He always has a way of expressing those ideas in witty terms, and therefore people like to listen to him. They may reject or accept, that is their problem, but then he is an interesting person to hear, interesting person to read, and Unsocial Socialist is that kind of a writing. The other book which I wanted to mention in this lecture, in the general introduction of this playwright under the series, is it will make you think, particularly the women's section in our society. It is called The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism. Why should he talk about women and socialism? And when he does so, why does he address only the intelligent women? And because he needs women to be intelligent. Most of them are believers, They are not supposed to be intelligent. They are not exposed to, let's say, the world of ideas and the world of reality outside their homes. But then, unless the woman is intelligent, she will not see the game of males in society. So therefore he says, okay, I write for the intelligent woman and I tell her what socialism is. So these are the things that Bernard Shaw is known for. He provokes, he polemicizes, he attacks, he disagrees, and he entertains. So this is how Bernard Shaw writes his plays, and after this we will take up the one play to understand what is the essence of being a Bernard Shaw and writing a play and choosing a woman as the mouthpiece of the writer. Thank you.